Hero Time, Chapter 33, Meeting. Kevin was under a car when he heard the voice. He'd been moonlighting for Ed the mechanic. It was good, steady, honest work. 3 things that couldn't describe any of the jobs he'd had up until then. Ed was also very flexible with the schedule, as he was aware of Kevin and Gwen's other job as plumbers, literally the only law in the sector at the moment. That still made him smile. The voice that called out his name did not. Kevin Levin. The thick English accent gave him away. Kevin rolled out from under the car and looked up into the face of a tall man with brown hair and bright hazel eyes. He was wearing a suit, tailored and well made. The only thing that gave him away for what he really was a small pin he wore on his lapel. A silver sword with the crossguard replaced with an infinity symbol.
Director, the hell are you doing here?
Kevin stood and stepped over to the opened hood of the car he was working on. He picked up a wrench and kept working, shooting a look at Ed across the shop. He was the only one currently here, the others were out at lunch. Ed raised an eyebrow at the man, and Kevin shrugged.
I have heard you are running with a new crowd, Kevin.
Everything he said sounded condescending, and Kevin couldn't tell if it was just the accent or not.
So, if the rumors are true, then you would be the man to speak to about brokering a meeting with Jennifer Tennyson.
Kevin went still for an instant. That had not been what he was expecting. He had been expecting the knight to try and talk him into brokering an illegal deal again. He would not be dealing again. He liked having his badge too much. He turned, the wrench still in his hand.
Why do the Forever Knights want to talk to Gen 10?
He asked, waving the wrench to emphasize his question. Hector smiled slightly, just a quick uptick of the corner of his mouth, glad to have caught the ex-con's attention. We require a meeting with her. That is all I can tell you now.
And you're here to broker a deal that I bring her to you. I'm not in the habit of betraying my friends.
He said it smoothly, as if he hadn't betrayed her before, and it wouldn't be a revelation to the knight in front of him that he was friends with Jen. Indeed, it got a raised eyebrow, a sign of pure shock from Hector. Kevin had worked with this man before. He was one of the knights the other knights didn't like to talk about because he had connections to the DNAlien weapon trade. It wasn't honorable work. But it had kept Kevin in his apartment and out of debt to many people for a while, and Hector had been his main contact. The brown-haired man was famously reserved.
No, not betrayal. You have my word that neither she nor you nor her cousin, who we assume will accompany you, will be harmed. We only wish to speak. We require her assistance. You will also be handsomely paid.
Hector turned to the door and beckoned to the 2 men standing there in suits. Each held 2 silver suitcases. Hector took one and set it on the open engine of the car. He popped it open and stepped aside so Kevin could see what was inside. It was full of cash. He took a second briefcase and opened it. This one was full of tadenite. 2 of each. Kevin inspected the briefcase with an unimpressed look.
Not enough.
He closed them and set them on the floor before kicking them over to their handler. Hector looked taken aback.
This is twice your normal asking price. Then you're asking for something special. No, not to mention last time I worked with you, you skipped out on my pay and got a friend of mine killed.
He hadn't known Magister Labrid long, but the alien had given him a chance. You did that. Hector frowned. What will it take for you to arrange this meeting? Kevin raised an eyebrow. Those were dangerous words for a broker to say to another during a bargain. He looked Hector over again, leaning on the car. The man's hair wasn't slicked back like normal, and there were bags under his eyes. His fingernails were also chewed down, a bad habit Hector had that was always a tell for stress and desperation.
I need a few pieces of tech. Energy cuffs, 3 sets with the keys. I need 4 laser lances and a containment cube, along with the cash and the tadenite you've already offered.
Hector pulled a phone out of his pocket and stepped off to the side, pressing one of the buttons. Kevin grinned at the knight still holding the briefcases. The man stayed stock still, glaring anywhere but at Kevin. The knights hated working with anyone who didn't conform to their view of the world. Done, Hector said, hanging up the phone. He nodded to the knight, who was still holding the cases, and he set them down. Keep this half of the payment. You'll receive the rest of your requests tonight at the rendezvous. 6 o'clock at this address. He pulled a folded piece of paper out of an inside pocket and handed it off to Kevin. Without another word, he turned and left, taking his knights with him. Kevin stared after him. They were desperate. Hector hadn't even tried to talk him down. Ed cleared his throat behind him. Everything all right? Kevin shrugged, picking up 2 of the briefcases.
Probably not. The Forever Knights are spooked, and they don't spook easy.
Ed looked over the shady briefcases, and Kevin's heart gave a twinge. Ed hadn't known he was a criminal. Used to be a criminal. Ed nodded. You're buying lunch. Get that fuel line fixed. You can put those down in the hole for now. Kevin grinned.
Thanks, Ed.
Ed nodded.
I only ask that you take any fights outside if this happens again.
Kevin's smile nearly split his face as he nodded. Finding the Tennyson girls turned out to be a bit harder than he expected. He ended up having to track the Omnitrix with his badge. They were at Gwen's school, in the gym. He walked in as Gwen judo flipped her cousin and pinned her. He blinked slightly, but stood by the door as the girls wrestled for a moment. The smack of a knee meeting a stomach and had Gwen rolling off her cousin and raising her hands in surrender. Jen rolled back to her feet and winced. Sorry. You know I don't react well to being pinned, though. Gwen nodded as her hands glowed and she ran them across her stomach before she managed to stand. Her tank top rose slightly and Kevin caught a glimpse of a disappearing bruise, vanishing too rapidly to not be Gwen healing it with her powers. I honestly forgot. Sorry. Gwen apologized as she pushed her bangs out of her face. Jen nodded and grabbed her water bottle before she spotted Kevin and frowned. Kevin, you look serious? What's up? He shook his head and stepped forward.
I set up a meeting for you.
Both girls raised eyebrows at him. With who? They asked the question in near unison, which was a little creepy.
Doesn't matter, come on.
Gwen's eyes narrowed at him. With who? Her voice had gone steely. Jen took a long drink from her water bottle.
The Forever Knights.
Water spewed across the wrestling mats. Jen looked up at him, incredulous. You're kidding. He shook his head. Then you're nuts. They got Magister Labrid killed. They've been trying to kill me for years.
And they need help, desperate enough to come to you, though they couldn't find you directly.
Gwen shook her head. They paid you to bring Jen to them, didn't they? The redhead crossed her arms as he spluttered at her question.
Can't I ever do anything out of the kindness of my heart?
Both girls were glaring at him now, and Jen looked about ready to kick his ass, alien or not. He let the facade drop.
Okay. They approached me to broker a meeting, requested Jen specifically, assumed we'd be there too. He gestured between himself and Gwen. Paid me double what I normally charge for brokering weapons deals, and caved to my demands for alien tech immediately when I said no. They're desperate. They need help.
Jen still looked skeptical.
Look, I've never seen this guy so spooked, and I've known him a while. I've also never seen him cave to demands like this. They're scared of something, Jen. Have you ever known a Forever Knight to be scared?
Jen thought about it for a moment as Gwen glared between them. The redhead would be overruled if Jen agreed. She would go, of course. She wouldn't leave Jen alone with the Forever Knights, but still, she remembered the first time they'd encountered the Knights. They'd been trying to dissect Jen, who'd been stuck as gray matter, talking about this being the first encounter with this species in centuries. Fine. I'll meet with them, but if there's any sign of a double cross, we take them down hard. Kevin nodded.
Of course.
Chapter 34. Tall Tales. They pulled up in front of the castle, because of course it was a castle, several miles outside of Bellwood. Jen had known Kevin's windows were opaque from the outside, but she hadn't known the real reason until he turned in his seat and spoke to them.
Stay here until I make sure they have the payment. They don't give it, we take off.
The girls nodded and Kevin got out of his car. He'd parked so his side of the car was facing away from the doors.
You got what I wanted?
He was talking to a brown-haired man dressed in full armor. The man rolled his eyes and gestured a few boys forward forward. They were carrying 2 crates between them and a smaller box stacked on top of it. Kevin looked it all over carefully and popped the trunk of his car. The boys, a few years younger than Jen by the look of them, set down the crates. Kevin closed the trunk and tapped his knuckles on the window, nodding. Jen nodded to Gwen, and the 2 teens stepped out of the car. Kevin clicked the key fob, locking the doors as the knight with the brown hair relaxed slightly. He nodded, and one of the other boys stepped forward. He and Jen were about the same height, 5 foot nothing. He was also blonde, with an awful bowl cut and bright blue eyes. "This is Gregory, the squire of our order," the knight introduced him almost dismissively. "He will explain the situation and introduce you to his master, Sir Connor, squire." The blonde bowed and smiled at them. As he led them into the castle, Jen heard one of the knights behind them speak to the brown-haired one. "Should you be so dismissive of Sir Connor's squire?" The man snorted. "Sir Connor goes through squires like a man with the flu goes through tissues." The door closed behind them, cutting off the laughter of the knights. Jen frowned at Kevin and Gwen. Kevin shrugged, and Gwen returned her cousin's frown. "Nice to meet you, Gregory. I'm Jen." The boy smiled back at them, looking slightly nervous. "Oh, I know who you are. You're quite famous throughout the order." Jen blinked at that, but nodded. She'd tangled with the knights enough for there to be stories about her. Fair enough. Gregory seemed to be a nervous talker, though. "When I heard where Sir Connor was heading, I could hardly believe it, that I would get to meet a changeling in person." He looked back and frowned slightly at their confusion. He laughed slightly. "I am sorry you wouldn't know that story. It's one of the more obscure tales of the knights." He pushed back a section of his armor on his wrist and checked the watch beneath, before repositioning it back into place. "Follow me." He led them into a hall off the main one. It was locked until Gregory pulled out a keyring, very old-fashioned, and opened the door for them. He led them past tapestry after tapestry depicting epic battles between knights and various beasts, some of which Jen recognized as aliens. The further down the hallway they went, the older the tapestries got. By the time they reached the end of the hall, Jen was reasonably certain they were surrounded by ancient history. Gregory pointed to one of the tapestries. "It is one of the oldest stories the knights tell. Most believe at least part of it to be fiction. But with everything I've seen, I don't." They turned to the tapestry in question. It was large, full length from the floor to the ceiling. The biggest figure in it was a black dragon reeling backwards, mouth open, poised to strike as the battle raged around its feet. 2 figures stood apart from the melee. One was a tall knight in shining armor. The other was a bit odd. She was smaller than the knight, and dressed in a gown of green with black trim. Between her and the knight was a gleaming sword. Each of them appeared to be holding it with one hand. The girl's face was pale, and her hair long and brown, her eyes as green as the gown she was dressed in. She was the only woman in the whole tapestry. The story goes that the original Forever Knight, founder of our order, fought a fierce dragon to a stalemate. But just when he believed there was no way to defeat the creature, a fey being gifted him a sword of great power. Their battle raged, but try as he might, he could not comprehend the power of the blade he was gifted, and he was wounded in a battle with the creature. It was about to strike the final blow when a changeling appeared. He pointed to the girl in the tapestry. They say when she first appeared she was a tall being cut from stone, who healed his wounds and beat back the dragon. With the creature routed, the stone figure transformed into the woman depicted here. Between the 2 of them, they were able to harness the sword's power and defeat the dragon. Jen frowned at the bottom of the tapestry. Across the border were characters. They weren't English, but it was definitely writing, and the thing was, Jen recognized it. She looked over at Kevin, who was still looking at the girl in the tapestry. Gregory didn't notice that his audience wasn't as rapt as he was. But that is not the strangest part of the story. The strangest part of the story was that when the dragon's power was broken, the changeling vanished, never to be seen again. Some stories say she was a manifestation of the people that lost their lives in the battle with the dragon. Others say she was an angel sent to help the knight. Still others claim she was a fairy sent by the swordsmith to help the knight. No one knows the truth of the story. He turned to Jen, who was still examining the characters at the base of the tapestry. "When I heard about you, I formed a theory. What if the changeling woman simply went back to a normal life, and wished to not be involved in the fighting anymore, since the threat was taken care of? What if that power was passed down the generations?" Kevin was the one who laughed. "She doesn't do that on her own, dude." Jen nodded. He's not wrong. She held up the Omnitrix. I don't do it alone, or naturally. Sorry to bust your bubble. It's a cool tapestry, though. She fiddled with the necklace around her neck. Pretty sure it's off topic, too, though. Why are we here, Gregory? The squire blushed and nodded. Yes, sorry. Please, follow me. No, it's fine. It was an interesting story, but I am very interested as to why you guys paid Kevin to set up a meeting. Gregory and Jen began to walk away, and Gwen made to follow, but Kevin was still looking at the girl in the tapestry. You coming, Kev? Yeah, why are her eyes completely green? There's no white part of her eye, it's all green. Gwen looked closer at the tapestry. Huh, that is weird. But we should go after them, in case Jen starts a fight. Kevin nodded, but he glanced back at the tapestry as they left the room. He couldn't shake the feeling that the girl in the tapestry had looked familiar. The fact that the knights wanted their help tracking and subduing a dragon had Jen laughing so hard she doubled over. Even Gwen looked amused. Okay, look. Dragons aren't real. Come on. Kevin shrugged at Gwen, who had spoken. Could be an alien. They come in every shape and size. Okay, this prank is over. Come on, guys. Gregory stepped in front of them. Please, people are being hurt. We need your help. Jen sighed. Do you have any proof whatsoever that what you're telling me is actually happening? Even I don't do anything without some kind of proof. Insolent child. The man who spoke from the shadows had a thicker accent than Gregory did. Gregory flinched slightly. Jennifer Tennyson, this is Sir Connor, the most accomplished and strongest knight of our order. Jen glared. Yeah, I'm insolent, but I'm not an idiot. Connor stepped out of the shadows, looking down on Jen. I assure you the dragon is real. There is no room in this organization for doubt. Good thing I have no intention of joining the organization then, huh? Jen grinned at him, though it was really more of a smirk. Then, of course, the alarms went off, and they witnessed the fact that the dragon was indeed very real and blasted down 2 fighter jets, though the pilots got away. Jen grudgingly agreed to help, as the dragon had her innocence, but something about this whole situation just didn't feel right.